Thanks a million for returning after Lance's brilliant opening address. That was so interesting. This is a discussion that's between, I'm going to moderate it, I'm not going to be contributing too much, but between Mark and Jenny, Liz and Lance, but also between you all too. So hopefully right away, a lot of you in the room are involved in either writing or directing or producing or making some sort of programs or films or media projects in some shape or form. So I hope that this is the reason I've kind of arranged a room like this, so you feel comfortable enough to kind of get involved in the conversation. So feel free. We have a couple of roving mics here, so if you can try and use those if there's one close to you, just because we're recording. So I'll start off. I just want to introduce Liz Rosenthal from Power to the Pixel, incredible, as Lance mentioned, European organisation that has many facets to it. So I'll hand you over to Liz to explain what Power to the Pixel is.
Hi, thanks Nikki, and thank you very much for inviting me over to Darklight. So it's my first visit here. I'm very excited to come over because I always heard about it. Actually, from Lance originally, and I remember when your film was screened here. So it's really nice to make it here. So I set up Power to the Pixel in about 4 years ago now, and I come from an independent production background. I'll say a little bit about what we do first, and then sort of why I got into doing what I did. So the company, it's a company that looks at new ways to tell stories, to finance storytelling projects, and also to find new ways of engaging with audiences. So we come from, the people who run the company, it's me and my colleague Tishna Moller, we come from a film background, so we come out of a sort of audiovisual storytelling background, but become very interested in other ways that stories are told across different platforms. And that's what we're really looking at. And we're trying to sort of organise events and labs and different types of forums where we bring together leading creators, innovators, financiers, people who are looking in the space, who really want to get involved in the space, and entrepreneurs who are sort of changing the way that stories are reaching audiences. So the two sort of big main programs that we run are the Cross Media Forum that happens in London every year in association with the London Film Festival. We've just come out of it the week before last, so I'm still sort of recovering. If I'm slightly inarticulate, that's the reason. So the event now consists of, it's a forum where we have people like Lance, who's come every year and is very involved in Power to the Pixel, and we have a kind of conference day where people are very candid about what they do, and it's generally a mixture of people who tell sort of candid case stories about the stories or the sort of story IP projects they've made, and also people who do sort of think pieces around where culture and entertainment and business is going. And now we've launched a marketplace for cross-media projects. And when I say cross-media, I'm using the term in the same way that Lance said, he uses transmedia, we use cross-media, some people say multi-platform. I hate these definitions in the way you need them. Like Lance said, you really need them because you need to sort of give some idea of the space we're in. But it kind of doesn't matter. So when I mean cross-media, I mean it in a very kind of loose sense. So basically, we started a marketplace for cross-media projects where I think it's probably the first dedicated one in the world, where we're looking at all types of projects. It's an international market. We selected 18 projects from around the world. They're all different types of genre, which was really interesting because we got away, not all of them were sort of dystopian, thriller, end of the world type projects. So we had a real mix this year. It was the second time we actually did a project competition. So the market's new. We have a competition where we select half of the projects. So 9 out of the 18 projects who present over a day, and we bring together roundtables of experts and different types of potential partners from across different industries who respond to the project presentations. And it's kind of really interesting just seeing all those people respond to a story idea, because usually you hear people talking in silos about stories. And then we have meetings for the project with the different industries. And on the last day, we have a think tank where we sort of bring together about 20 different experts. And we're just about to publish a summary of what we discussed, which is basically what we feel the needs are for moving on. And they would come from every perspective, from a cross-media producer perspective, from a funder perspective, from someone from advertising industry, people from games industry, right across the board. So it's really interesting just looking at all the things, and that's in a way what the organisation is trying to do. We also run a lab where we help develop, what we're helping do is develop producers in a way to start rethinking how they're producing story IP. And it's very project focused, so it runs over 3 weeks, but the main part is really over a week, where we selected 17 projects from around Europe. It's media, the European Union programme fund half of the lab, so it's for European producers. We ran our first one this year, so we selected 17 producers with projects from across different types of industries. So they were interactive producers, kind of producers who produce for television and film and a bit in between and online. So it's a real mixture of people. And we take them through an intensive week where they're partnered with someone without a project who's a media professional. And then we have different experts come in and work on their projects. They work in groups, and then there are big presentations, about 20 different experts from around the world. And then they have some sort of distance learning, and then we took them back to our London event, and then we set up meetings with people from across industry. And we also act as advisors and consultants on a whole very number of projects. That could be small, that could be single projects for directors or producers, or it could be startups. I've been an advisor at the UK Film Council for 2 years on innovation and digital distribution, unfortunately all coming to an end, as you probably might know. But that's been an interesting journey, just seeing something, a funding organisation, obviously very based in cinema, trying to grapple with how things are changing. But I should probably end there. That's a bit. But my background, actually, I just wanted to say, I come from film. Since I was working with a company called Next Wave Films, that's how I met Lance when he'd done his first project, Lance Broadcast. And I became very disenchanted with the film business. I saw it as kind of like, it was completely limiting. We worked on 13, 14 films that all got into major festivals. Most of them won major awards, had some kind of very limited distribution, and never reached an audience. And I started looking into new ways that stories could reach audiences, and then realised that storytelling was transforming. It's not all about distribution. And my excitement about the category, my excitement about what I've done is so exponentially grown since I've moved out of being siloed in one single industry. And now I realise it's all about connecting up people with skills, and that's where I think there are big, big gaps, and it's how you build those connections.
Great. Thanks, Liz. So over to you guys. I don't know how you want to start.
I'll start as well. My name is Mark Ashmore, and this is Jenny Inchibald, and we're managing directors of a company called Future Artists Limited, which is based in Salford, which is next to Manchester in the northwest of England. And it was a company basically that came about. It's a film studio, but we like to call ourselves a virtual film studio. And it came about out of a need to deviate from the norm. We realised that as a storyteller and as a film director and as an artist, if I wanted to get my stories out to the maximum amount of people, that wasn't going to happen with the traditional routes to market. As Liz mentioned, award-winning films not getting limited distribution, and not finding the audience that they wanted to. We realised that we needed to create a brand new film company with a different outlook and a total different way of doing things. So, which is our motto, our mantra is, without deviation from the norm, progress is not possible. We stole that from Frank Zappa. Thank you very much for that. We don't agree with everything he does, but we like that phrase. And so that's our thinking. Future Artists is now a global company. We have pockets or cells in Nigeria, in LA, in India, Sri Lanka, Copenhagen, France. Lots of little countries have started to set up their own little Future Artists hubs and groups, which means that when we do eventually push our content and our stories out there, they will start to reach a global audience on the ground and also digitally online.
Yeah, and just kind of introduce Future. I don't know if anyone can see me, I'm in the dark. Mark's the sort of the creative head of Future Artists, and I think stats girl was recently used. And I look at this new environment very much from a kind of, okay, how do I find an audience? How do I finance this? How's this really going to work? And so at Future Artists, we kind of have three arms. We have the kind of content production arm where we go and make stuff. I use that word a lot. Then we've been experimenting with distributing other people's films. So we did something called Beyond the Pole, which was exec by Helena Baxendale. I had a couple of guys at Channel 4's comedy in it. We did an event release for that. Up in Manchester, we also worked on Soda Pictures' new
Soul Boy.
We did some stuff around all the events that they had, promoting that online. And then we've got Actors Guide Survival, and we did one for Broken Britain, and I hope I'm not forgetting anything. So we're kind of really, the way we've created ourselves is, 2 years ago we started up, and obviously at that time there was kind of the Workbook Project. And Power to the Pixel, who are kind of the people really in this sector, so we kind of looked at it, and then we looked at traditional film finance, and we're trying to kind of strategically position ourselves to the point where we kind of get to do all the new fun stuff with Transmedia, so that, it's like you don't need permission anymore. You don't have to say, to argue somebody anything other than, okay, well actually here's some stats, and this is how much it's worth, so this is the deal that I want. And we started to negotiate around that, and that's really helped us to start getting some finance on the table, and to start getting some good deals with a bit more money. But I mean, one of the projects that we'll be talking about later is a project called Praxis, which was a really low budget thing. We just got people from all around the world. I mean, Mark's going to talk about that. And then we financed that by having a live event and streaming stuff online, and all very low cost, using lots of free tools, through to our kind of other aspect of it in our content, which is we're working with various established film producers to look at bringing that structure in between the sort of the traditional and the new, to finance that around sort of between 1.2 and 3 million. So it's kind of respectable-ish budgets, for independent film in this part of the world. It's it's quite good, I think. So it's kind of bringing that together. I mean, who in this room is a filmmaker? And who in this room works in music? Who works on digital software? And what else does everyone else do? Because there's a couple of hands I didn't see.
Anyone that classes as an artist?
Yes.
Yeah. That's me.
Are there any funders here, actually? Any funding bodies? Yeah. One. That's right.
So yes, this guy you will jump on later. Sorry. But yeah, I guess that's one of us.
Over to you, I think.
Over to me? Okay, right. So I suppose one of the things that struck me about what was actually one of the first questions someone asked you, Lance, was about the kind of collaboration team. And I think this, you answered it in terms of kind of technically how you kind of build, I suppose, the networks. As you say, Ireland has a very strong technology kind of, community here, for example. So I suppose just kind of expand out that a little bit from that idea, and maybe ask you guys, and especially like Power to Pixel is only 4 years old. That's amazing. It's so visible. It's in such a short amount of time. It's a real achievement, and you've done such amazing things. And also for you guys in terms of creating these like global networks, I suppose. Just on a kind of practical level, how did you, I suppose, maybe Liz first, how did you kind of conceive the idea of doing this, and then how did you sort of build, the network of people that you need to help you to make something like Power to Pixel work on a European context now, because you're European-wide. So.
I mean, building an organisation has been, I work a lot, but I enjoy it a lot, and I'm very driven. But it came out of an idea, something I was doing in Canada called Digimart, where I reconnected with Lance actually when he made Head Trauma, and it was in 2006, I think, 2005 we did the first one, and the idea came. It was actually I was doing consulting around sort of ideas for new distribution. It wasn't all the sort of promise was around digital cinema, and it just seemed so like it wasn't going nowhere in terms of what was happening around cinema. And I was invited to put a program together though it was a guy called Daniel Langlois, who has a foundation in Montreal and is a big sort of patron of arts and technology, and has had a great cinema centre called the Excentrice. And he wants to put together a programme to do with digital cinema, and I was working with someone called Sheila de la Farronde who was running the programme, and I convinced them that was really boring, that the theatrical experience was just not where it was at, and we had to look at sort of new models online. And we brought together, like the first 2 years, sort of leading people who were sort of changing, who were setting up new platforms and tools. So it was like the year before YouTube started, so it was kind of a really exciting time, and Lance came to the second one, and it kind of didn't happen afterwards, and I thought this was such a great group of people together, and there were loads of fantastic conversations and collaborations started out of it. Tiffany Schlein, who started the Webby project, the Webby Awards, who's a filmmaker, Aaron Crumley and Susan Bice, who did Four-Eyed Monsters. There was a company called Reva. Who else was there? Lance?
Corey was there.
Cory Doctorow from Boing Boing. We had sort of people from Harvard who were in the Centre for Internet Society and Law. It was an amazing group of people, and I suddenly thought, you get these people together and great things happen. And I decided, I'd carry it on. I'm based in London. I've done loads of work with North America, but I thought it would be a really good place to start. And it would be a good place to bridge also the gap between sort of North America, Europe, and other places. So in a way, it's all about, there's an incredible willing of, all these people have got an amazing amount of energy and innovating. So it's a combination of people who've got networks of their own, like Lance got huge networks of fans around his film and around the Workbook project and the other projects. Tiffany, again, has got a huge amount of network around what she's doing. Everyone has their own network, and we kind of, I suppose they merge into one, and there's a kind of network of people doing the same thing. Same with Future Artists. You came to House of Pixel, you have your network. We sort of interconnect, and it's amazing how powerful that is. And that's what's happening really with story and media. There's a parallel going on that, we have our networks of people who are making things, and in a way that's what's happening to storytelling. It's kind of expanding out. And how did it start on the terms of funding and keeping it going? We've had sponsorship, some public funding for our programme, so it's a mixture of that, and we also do private work as well, where we are advising and consulting, so it's a whole mixture between the two. And we're actually based we've been invited into a large advertising agency recently called BBH, who are the biggest independent creative agency around the world. And it's kind of really interesting for us being there. So it's like we found actually there are people, and it's taken, it's kind of mushrooming this year. There are people in all of the media industries who are facing everybody's facing exactly the same issues, as Lance pointed out. And there are people within those industries and organisations. There's always someone who's a champion of this, of looking at new ways of joining the dots of cross-media, transmedia storytelling. And we tend to try and meet everybody who's the champion within our organisation or industry, and bring them together, and great things happen. And that's really hard, because a lot of the time film festivals have a bit attached that's digital, cross-media, and they invite people along. We're dedicated to that, so everybody who comes is kind of very driven and involved in the area.
If I could real quick, I think one of the things that's really interesting about right now is there's been this classic kind of competitive environment that's always existed within entertainment. And I think with all the what Liz is doing, what Jennifer and Mark are doing, what you guys do with Darklight is all about this idea of kind of a move from what was competitive into more of a collaborative space, which is really kind of reflective in terms of the idea of how, just in general, how culture is moving. So I think it's interesting, this accessibility of entertainment, or in terms of the design of these types of work. I think what you'll naturally see in this next phase is really about the design and the implementation of this stuff. Like, how do you actually really get going? How do you actually really build these things? How do you make them scalable? How do you make them work with traditional systems that are in place, in terms of the way that you fund them, in terms of the way that you embrace, those, as Liz said, there might be somebody who's in those organizations that maybe sparks to it, but then also like looking at it from the production standpoint of actually how you really physically produce this stuff and how you actually can apply it to the work that you're doing is really is a challenge, and I think that's where you're seeing more of the breakdown of what was traditionally competitive because people all knew the process to what is more collaborative now. So people are actually openly sharing those processes. So I think in terms of some of the stuff that all of us are collectively doing is really kind of about how do you document those processes and how do you make them more uniform so people can say, okay, well, this is all great, but how do I actually really apply it? Like how can I actually start?
It's so interesting because you actually briefly mentioned earlier on about how in some ways these are kind of borrowing, like with beta testing and borrowing so much from the kind of paradigms of software development and obviously open source and even you use the word sharing there, and it really seems kind of key to everything really. It is this sort of concept of like now kind of the idea of ownership and IP, and you mentioned even copyright, but I suppose that leading on to how you guys work, because it's very much about this collaborative sharing kind of
Should we talk about the Northwest New Wave and what's happening up in the Northwest to put this into context? To go back to how the networks and stuff work, and how Future Artists is growth, and people have heard about it because we use social media, and we use social media correctly and really well, use it as a conversational tool and also as a listening tool. So we started off on Facebook and Twitter and collected like minds, and how that starts is it's through friends. So friends that you sat next to, that you work with on a daily basis, and over a period of time, if they're interested in what you're talking about, the stories you're telling, what you're trying to achieve, and your ethos, i.e. deviation from the norm, trying to do something outside the system, it sort of attracts like minds. And on social media, that's the most perfect, beautiful tool that we've had that can allow that to happen. So to put this into context for Future Artists, when we put a project out there, or even when we started the company, all we did was invite a load of people to a fan page and started off with like 200 fans. On our fan page now, we're up to something like 945, which isn't massive, but the reach potentially from that, with all the networks that are plugged in, and when we've actually done big projects that have gone out there, takes us up to about 60 to 70,000 people and beyond. But that's 60,000 people that we've measured through stats and analytics and stuff that Jen's done. But what this means is that we know when we do something, it can go out to that audience. But we also built that for free. This is the thing. We had no funding. We haven't worked with brands at the very start of our process. So we built the company up with nothing by doing part-time jobs, and now we do it full-time. So we didn't have any funding. So for times now, this is all stuff that you guys can do. If you can harness social media, use it correctly, that's going to be one of your most powerful tools. By empowering others, like we've heard from the networks that we've created, by empowering others to do the work with you and collaborate with you, they become your network, they become your distribution model. So just to throw this in, is that you can have a network that's got a big email list and maybe a big entity, but everyone in that network has also got, we've got friends that have got 2,000 friends on their Facebook, and they're actors because they have harnessed social media. So they've got 2,000 friends. So an individual can reach 2,000 people. So if you've got 20 friends that have all got 2,000 friends in their little circle, they're going to get to, what's the math on that? 40,000? She does math, so. But you see what I'm saying? There's 20 people, so they can reach that amount of people. And we've got 945 on a fan page, 1,600 on Twitter, a big mailing list, and then all the other networks we can plug into. It gives you that reach when you put that film out, or else want to tell that story.
I think there's a couple of other things as well that's really important. Is number one, why is anybody going to give a crap about the story that you're telling? Because we can all come up with the most whizzy things in the entire world that we can possibly do, but it's so important to think, who is actually going to be interested about this? Where do they hang out online, and what do they do? And I think that's something that sometimes people who go and decide to create something or do something can kind of forget about. And I think to do it once you've made a film is kind of making it difficult for yourself to do it that way. I think it's really important to think about these things in the pre-production phase so that you know you're building assets into the way in which you're working. And I think you brought this up as well, is it fundamentally completely alters the way in which you make a film. So what Mark just mentioned about the social media stats, for example, if we're doing a casting, then yeah, your number of fans on Twitter or your following on Facebook is going to influence whether we pick you up for this.
If you're an actor.
If you're an actor, if we pick you up for this or not. And if you're a sound guy who has a blog, there's a guy called Enos who's, I've completely forgotten the name of his blog, I'm really sorry Enos. but he's a fan on our Facebook page. He is Mr. Sound, and he's really into it. He writes a fantastic blog. He has a lot of following, so for us, he's a great sound guy to work with, because not only does he really know his stuff, but he has a following as well. So there's all these kind of micro assets that your cast and crew will have, that you need to create formats and ways of working with them. So you need to know the social media presence of people being involved and what value that is, because obviously then you've got to bring that into contract law. There's also to do with all your IP, and it's about kind of working together on that, but at the same time using social media. One key thing that we've used it for, and it's not the volume of people we found that helps you, it's the quality of people.
It's the 5% producers in the pyramid.
We used to have a press release, and then I used to have to make 600 emails and 600 phone calls and go hi and have that conversation that you have with the journalist, where they don't really want to talk to you, you don't really want to talk to them, but you have to assess if the story has value, so you kind of have to have this conversation. Now loads of them follow us on Twitter. So what do? We upload our press release onto Twitter via our blog and go, hey, check out our new press release with the headline. Brilliant. It gets out there to blogs.
And they've been following that before that, so they're just waiting for the press release so they don't have to write an article. So they've been following it before.
So they know the story. They already know the story. You know, they can just pick it up, and then all you have to do is tweet the article back and say thanks later on. And that's the kind of the established payoff. So that's been really great as well. There's been other companies that we've been able to access. So for example, with Aon, they insure all of the big major Hollywood studio stuff. They're very well connected.
Every single James Bond film.
And their head of marketing, who's really into Twitter and social media, pushing out their company, she's been kind of helping us out on stuff, and we just chat on Twitter, and then through somebody else that we know, we've kind of been able to get a deal together for them, which makes us look quite good. So like where you said, in each organisation there is somebody who is into this. You can find them through social media. We don't need to get on a plane to go to America to be friends with Aon. We just use social media, and that for us has been brilliant, because it breaks boundaries, it breaks walls. And not being funny, I'm 26 years old. If I came up to you and said, knock, knock, hi, can I have 1.5 million? You probably wouldn't really give it to me. But if I'm active on social media, you don't know how old I am, you don't know how I look like, and all I can bring you is ideas. And if you like them and you respond to them, then that's great, because whenever I finally meet you, the prejudices are all kind of gone, because they're far down into the ideas process, or the hook's there. And I think that for us as well has been a really great thing.
I think that, it's really good. There's also a lot of hard work behind that too. We were talking about this last night, you know. You have to sort of, to build, you know, to kind of generate and build networks as well, you know. I mean, and obviously the ideas need to be there as well, you know, quality ideas. And I mean, you do a lab, so I'm just curious, how do you kind of, you know, sort of, I guess, deal with the holy grail of, you know, getting that kind of exposure on the social networks, and how do you advise people around that in your lab?
mean, in a way, as Lance pointed out, we're in a really early stage now of sort of developing these stories effectively, and we've seen now, we've really had 2 years where we've had quite a lot of projects being sent to us. So it's kind of interesting, we've been sent projects from around the world, just getting a look and a handle on the kind of stage that people are at. And these are the producers who are kind of interested. Some of them are more advanced, and you know, some of them have come from an interactive production background, and others come from a more traditional background and are starting to collaborate with people who are experts. And you know, this is a really early stage. One side, the storytelling is, you know, experimental stage at that, right at the beginning, as you said, silent era. And the other side, there's the funding and there's the industry structures who are not ready. So, and I thought you put it really well, that, you know, this is it's a kind of chicken and egg situation. You got really undeveloped, you know, we're experimenting with story and technology, and at the same time we're being kind of like shoehorned into ways that funding works now and is comfortable with funding, which doesn't help the category at all, because it's putting it in, it's, you know, there's a checklist of things that people feel they have to have in their transmedia project.
And do you find from broadcasters as well as film funds similarly? Yeah.
Well, most of the, even, I mean, you know, most of the commissioners, it's interesting because we're now inviting tons of people from different broadcast companies, from games, from advertising, film, and you get a handle of where people are at. And there are a few companies who are moving forward, but there's only like a couple really. And I would say, you know, later when I do my workshop, I'll give some case studies. I mean, Arte, for example, is and it's the people who are in the companies who've driven this forward as well, are completely moved forward. They're a public service. If you don't know, they're a broadcaster across France and Germany. They've really embraced this, and the commissioners really understand the category, are already trying to understand. Whereas other people, it's really siloed. For example, in the BBC, there are different commissioners, and it's still the traditional commissioner of the made-for-TV format who makes the decision on what's commissioned, and then the multi-platform commissioner comes around and does the wraparound 360, which is not really 360, interactive part of the programme. So there's a disconnect between those two sides, and we found even in our lab, some of the better projects, there's been a problem because there are different producers dealing with separate elements. They're not working together. So let's say it's a documentary. The documentary's been commissioned by one person. It's made, and then they've got to do a 360 thing because that's what the BBC wants to do. So they get an interactive producer to design that part. There's no communication. Even the rights might be owned by different people. And then when it comes to selling internationally, it's a complete mess because you can't. It's not a format that can be taken and even sold out if that's what you want to do. So there are all kinds of issues. I mean, there are hundreds of issues. But when it comes back to the stories, what we're trying to do, it's a very elementary stage. We're trying to get people with projects, and we're very wide when we say, can you submit your cross-media idea? And we get people to break down what that could be in terms of the story. The story is really important, and a lot of people forget the story. It's absolutely fundamental, and get really involved in the sort of checklist and the transmedia elements and the, just making sure they're using as many things as possible, which does not work. It's not the way to start when you're trying to build that story universe. We're just trying to get people over. So people do that. So the way they submit is they submit a story idea. We get them to describe how they're thinking of designing the story across different platforms, media, what their kind of audience engagement strategy is, how it's going to be delivered, what's the plan for rollout, and what's the financing plan. So it could be quite basic. But, so it's very wide what we're getting back, and we're having a whole mixture from, social issue documentary to, large-scale properties that maybe, that some are more sort of TV, made for TV, and some are more film-based, but they tend to have a sort of primary media that's at the centre of either a feature film or a series. Sure. But when they come in the lab, that kind of starts breaking down. So that's what we're trying to do is take all these projects and get different experts to just talk to, work through those different areas over the week. So it's kind of rudimentary. And then the next stage, and this is not something, so it's mostly producers, we're trying to get them to think around how to be a producer, a transmedia producer, whatever you call it. And in fact, I think it's just a producer. I think you're a story producer, and when we get rid of these terms, it'll be easier. Because in fact, it's trying to get people to be in charge of the IP that they're developing across wherever it goes. And what's happened, we've had these big budget projects, and we saw it in our Pixel pitch. There are things that are 6 million euros, 10 million euros that are way too high. They're never going to raise that money. And what's happened is we've come down to the essence of what the story is and where the story can start. And often they've been scaled back into something that actually becomes doable for the producer, into maybe a graphic novel element. As Lance said, he started Head Trauma that way, and how effective that has been. Not just in terms of it's something you could actually do and you could afford to do and kind of bootstrap, but the fact of what that brought in terms of the storytelling and what you could use out of it. And it's been really interesting because it's actually been a sigh of relief for a lot of the producers when they've started somewhere with a story idea that they can build from. And then instead of thinking, I'm going to do a TV series, I'm going to do a feature film, I'm going to do an ARG, and it's going to be on mobile, it's going to be everywhere online, I'm going to try and re-licensing it across the world. And it's a very long answer, but we're starting right at the beginning, and we're breaking down right at the beginning. But I think the problem is this R&D stage. That's the next part that is got to really grow, and something we've
what's interesting too on the other side of the Pixel pitch is there's a whole education side that's going on in terms of helping people to be able to validate what a transmedia or cross-media project is, so from an evaluation from a funding perspective, like what is a good transmedia project? How does it have the right team behind it? Is it the right story? Is it the right way to tell this story? So I think even in the Pixel the pitch does that very effectively in terms of bringing people together, because I think fundamentally that's the other gap, you know, as much as it's kind of ironic, you know, like the audience is actually ready, the industry is behind, and the storytellers are behind, you know, so it's like, you know, it's like this one kind of time where, well, that's happened in other parts of history as well, so.
Sure, yeah. Sorry, Jennifer.
I was just going to say, the kind of the financial model that we've been looking at is kind of like, I mean, obviously, you know, we've been long-time followers of class pitches and work with projects, so a lot of our kind of, I think, early mistakes were avoided because we got to see everyone else's and also see what worked. But the kind of financial model that we've been putting out, I think it's interesting what you say about just producers, because with the projects that we've got now, is that I kind of take on a role as the kind of transmedia producer, and producers that I'm working with take on the role of traditional producer, but we kind of operate as a double-headed beast. So where my co-producer would be going off and kind of playing the traditional route, so packaging it for traditional industry, traditional finance, and then fixing all the kind of finance plan that I've put forward around the transmedia elements kind of onto that as a kind of added bonus, so that we present it very much as a kind of a marketing thing, even though it's actually created through story. It's created because it's interesting and it's fun, and there's a, you know, there's a passionate voice there that's speaking for that. We kind of take it down to the stats and marketing level and package that out for industry, and that's what we've been doing. We've been having like a modicum of success for that, which has been quite surprising, and we're starting to get some proper.
Did you do that consciously? Sorry to interrupt. Did you do that consciously? That you thought that's what funders could cope with?
Yeah, I did like a. Sorry, it's a bit loud. I did this thing called the Take 12 program with the Film Council, and I went on it with a producer called Jenny Walker at FOR Films, and we kind of did it together. And she's kind of interested in engaging the new, and I was kind of like, well, I could do with a bit of hand in terms of the politics of the industry, getting access to cast, you know, kind of high-level distributors, that kind of a thing. And we just spent 8 months working through this project, and we came out at the end of it with this finance strategy that kind of, I think, is a meeting point between the new and the traditional. And it's to find that language that they can talk at, and as well it's to give that space for the story, to kind of leverage your financial situation so that you give the space for the story to maybe make mistakes. And I call it planning to be strategic and reactive. That's my great kind of like phrase, to be like, yeah, there's going to be some stuff that's going to go wrong, but that's totally fine, and it's in the finance plan, and that's a strength. So we've kind of been arguing it from that perspective, and that's kind of been really interesting. But I know what you say about in terms of projects and people coming and saying, I want to do all these 65 million things, and I'm going to have £100 million, and you're like, that's not going to happen. Because we kind of ended up consulting on other people's projects, because we're based up and around Manchester and Salford, and there's a very kind of get up and do it, kind of get up and go kind of attitude. Not so much a publicity or necessarily financial angle, but definitely creative and just kind of doing. So we've been kind of brought into some stuff, and I did a crossover lab with Sheffield Doc Fest the other year, and we had a lot of people coming from the broadcasting industry, and what was really interesting was some people were saying, I know it's app, they're sending all this stuff, so what can be, and I said, what's your development cost? £150,000, or what's your maximum market reach? And at that point it was, I think it was 2 million out of X million iPhones, we worked it out, but it was like 250,000. This character, and can we place it in that world? And we've been kind of looking at doing things like that, and that's been getting a real positive response, because the payoff for that campaign is that it gets linked into a bigger project that's more popular, which makes it more accessible. I mean, this is predominantly the 15 to 25 demographic, but that kind of stuff has been working really well. So it's kind of,
yeah.
No, I just
sorry, do you mind if you just get the mic? Sorry.
Sorry, Tommy Weir here.
Thanks, Tommy.
Just some of you have had success, like raising finance for this, which as a producer is a big interest of mine. Have you found, Lance, you had that great kind of list of almost depth of engagement, you know, from low-hanging fruit, you called it, of marketing and promotion, down through social engagement, activism, through down to storytelling. Have you found that funders and financiers are stuck somewhere up at point one,
Yeah, and
do you find that it sounded like to me that you use that actually to get your finance?
Yeah, I
proceed ahead to point 10. But how have you found the level of understanding?
Well, I think it's definitely at the first point, because I think for them it's the immediate need and where, where they're all trying to understand the category. A lot of it comes down to being able to derive for them some type of thing that's comfortable within their, like the way they evaluate. So if you come in and you're able to point to metrics and be able to say, here's what we think the audience is and here's how we can potentially deliver this, and it meets those needs, a lot of them are looking right now and saying, okay, this is how we, the spending, at least on the brand side, is really coming from interactive spends, and then it's like, okay, in order to do media buys and the way that works, it's all predicated by somebody saying, okay, well, what's the reach of this, and what what level, how large is the audience? So I think in terms of that desire to kind of come in on the promotion and the marketing side of it, and naturally then have the audience building, they're very interested in that part. Definitely interested in that part. I think the caution of that for a lot of people who are producers is you're not necessarily going to have the size of the audience that they're going to want to see to match whatever that performance is. So that's when you have to get strategic and start to find partnerships in some way that you can work with other parties, where the storytelling that you have becomes a very valuable asset. And I've done that many different times, where you'll go and you'll start to stitch together basically an offering that has a wider reach. And then, some of that might be, it could be, in the past I've done it with people who have large blogs. I've done it with, various service providers. They might be a telco, they might be a cable system, they might be a satellite provider, and just kind of working to stitch together a larger package effectively. And then to be able to say, okay, I have this carriership now, it represents 13 million homes in this particular aspect, here's this online part, and then breaking it all down. And then a lot of the times it's been very beneficial to go in doing some reconnaissance in terms of understanding where either they're going as a direction, the things they're interested in financing or funding, and then also looking at where they are categorically, and I've used that to my advantage numerous times in terms of competitive aspects, being able to lay it out, and say, it's a little bit different here where it might be a funding body, but I think as things are happening right now with the UK Film Council and how funding's kind of up in the air, in Europe it's kind of an appropriate time to look at other potential models that might be able to help you sustain as a creator. So I think in some ways some of the advertising space is a very interesting space, because more and more is going to go to the digital sector, and it's a matter of like, okay, how can you take that over and apply it to the projects that you want to do? And then if you're able to find innovation funds or able to find soft money is great, but now you're not necessarily solely dependent, and actually that approach has actually been even beneficial towards obtaining soft monies, because it's not necessarily just the soft monies that are putting in. So now you're matching back in a totally different way. So yeah, but it is very much that first point. They're very interested in that.
And also, I was going to say as well, like when it comes to dealing with finance, and brands are, in terms of the sort of financial marketplace, are just a little bit more understanding on this kind of a thing than the other kinds of organisations and peoples and stuff that I've dealt with. But the other thing as well with brands I've also found is getting into them in the right way, with the right people, in a way that you're not going to get maybe some of your IP leached or things like that when you're first starting out. I think for me, I now just try and go for the marketing guy at the brand. I try and avoid agencies, not because I think all agencies are bad. It's that just level of, you then have that direct relationship, so you know exactly where it's going.
I think
it's really complex doing in the advertising world, because there are a few brands you can go direct, very few who have programs that are interested in storytelling. And for example, Puma recently formed an alliance with BritDoc, the documentary foundation, Channel 4, that Just Search runs out of the UK. Nike's got involved in films. Who's that? Diesel, yeah. And it's interesting sort of fashion brands. And also, of course, then are sort of media companies who are, who are obvious brand partners who we never think of. We think of them as distribution partners, but actually in terms of brand, they're brand partners. But it's still incredibly traditional, the advertising industry, and I'm learning more and more about it as I'm situated in a creative agency. And they're incredibly siloed, actually just as siloed as we are in our industry. The campaigns that are done for brands, there's somebody who's doing the digital campaign. When I mean digital, that could be the tiniest piece of flash video that's put on the website of the brand. Down to that, sitting over there's the TV campaign over there, there's a cinema campaign, there's a print. It's totally different, and they haven't integrated either. So it's kind of very new. All the industries are facing the same, and then all the agencies have innovation labs, and some are kind of more effective than others and understand transmedia. I mean, in BBH where we are, they're really interested in transmedia, and the people who run the lab, that's kind of their thing. But as Mel Exon, who runs the BBH lab out of London, she says, it's very, very young for brands to have got involved in space, and there aren't that many examples. I mean, they tend to be sort of media company examples, networks, and other people who've partnered. But I think it's interesting what you said about going to the marketing person, because in the same way, marketing, sponsorship, and advertising are three separated things, and they're totally siloed. And it's amazed me how they're different people dealing with them. So the brand has their own PR person.
We rarely, we don't take the entire project to one person. We don't do that because the thinking isn't there. You'll terrorise them, you'll confuse them, or they'll just be like, go away.
Or they go to their agency because they're paying them millions of pounds, dollars, euros to do their campaign.
So we break it down, and
it's a stick or brick. You call it stick or brick.
Well, it's that whole idea of in filmmaking, you always smuggle your issues. Do you know what I mean? Like if you look at the big
Smoke
films,
and mirrors.
And it's kind of like, well, let's just smuggle our finance. Let's smuggle our transmedia into our finance. That's what we've been looking and packaging it in kind of cunning ways. So you sell people what they think you want, and it's actually what you want. And then because it works really well, everybody's still really happy about it, and it's kind of sneaky educating.
That's what we do in Europe because of funding.
Yeah.
Because we're very good at filling in funding forms. I think we're very good at twisting.
You have to be.
It always amazes the North Americans, the intricacies of filling in funding forms.
We did 12 funding forms to our screen agency with all this sort of stuff in, and 12 rejections. But we go to the brands and do it Jenny's thing, and it's like open doors, because they've been following you on social media as well, so they're interested in meeting you and having a chat and a coffee.
Yeah, get the brands on social media and get them really excited and say stuff about their project and make them think you're really interesting. That's a great way of getting them to want to sit and meet with you.
You should be careful being recorded.
Some brands have interesting things.
But going back to the point that you made about the measurement idea of what's of value, and it is really interesting because they're interested more and more in engagement, and that's a very complex thing to measure, that they're kind of changing the way they do that. But it's not necessarily about millions, it's about the level, the deepness of the level of engagement with a very with the audience that the target audience they want to reach, and that's a very interesting thing.
Well, I think it's moving more towards the idea of a conversion. They need a conversion, and if they're going to lead to some type of a point of purchase or some type of way that they can actually demonstrate that led to a transaction for them, they're very interested in that.
I mean, loyalty is a massive one for them.
And loyalty, status, all the things you were talking about in gaming, in a bizarre way.
But you've got all the affiliate, from affiliate marketing. You've got all the coding there, everything to be able to do this, to be able to track people, and to be able to bring out the stats. So it's not an impossible ask. But then if you look at the traditional film industry and you look at how you package it for film, it's not a hugely different world at all. If I was taking traditional film to industry, I'd do my comparables, and I'd go to a sales agent, and I'd go pretty please, and then they'd give me some statistics.
But it's box office.
Yeah, it is box office, but it's still what I think I'm worth, what I think my reach is going to be, and I prove that in my sales. And I think brands aren't asking for anything different. It's just that it's a different language expressed in a different way. And I think we have those skills. It's just conceptually, it's actually not alien. It's just a different language in a different sector.
It's reach, but I think we only have, in a bizarre way, the only figures that are made available to the general industry is box office.
Yeah.
And that's the only vaguely reliable, that's the reliable, we have nothing else, there's no other figures you can count on.
If we could get DVDs,
so you can't get anything.
Brilliant. If I could lay my hands on the DVDs, like global net DVDs for projects, it would make my job and my life so much easier because I could really properly argue the returns, because I can't see the point as a non-US distributor of, non-Hollywood studio US distributor of film in really talking about how much I'm going to make at the box office, because I'm not. And it would be really useful to have an ability to have that DVD breakdown.
Or the level of engagement, like the stats that you did on head trauma, those very simple diagrams that you showed, which are incredibly valuable, and you show that to, I mean, traditional financiers don't get given that kind of information. It's always rubbish box office forecasts, which everyone knows don't mean anything. International sales mean absolutely nothing now. So those kind of things kind of excite people. Whether they know what to do with them, it still is a different story, and it's in the millions.
The amount of emails that you got is something, you know, just...
And like you said, it's something you're doing, and it's so you haven't got huge amounts of money to do it, but it's kind of...
No, but it's kind of like, it's budgets where I can actually start to pay people, because we do a lot of collaborative work, and I just really want to be able to pay people, because I think that's an industry and that's an ecosystem, and that's just fair. And so, yeah, we've not got vast amounts of money that we're putting out for and sort of negotiating on at the moment, but it's enough to pay people, and it's kind of...
Pays the rent. So for us, you know, we can get through and do it and run a business and get, you know, and progress, pay all the overhead. So we have a sustainable business model now. Now we just need the people to believe in us that we've got the reach, and looking at the case studies and the stats. And if they want to make some money out of it, they've got the opportunity to do that.
But I think
and
the
off
stats,
we go on
like
the road.
Yeah, the stats are there, and it's really useful. And at the moment, it's just learning how to negotiate with them, like what you say to different people. Because if I go to an ad agency and I start talking transmedia, and I use the term transmedia, it's like something completely over here, to where I go to somebody else, and you know, if I go to an ad agency and I talk transmedia, they're like, oh, what do you mean, like the red button on your TV? So I'm like, gosh, yeah, that still exists, doesn't it? No. And I think that's another thing, is like, I feel like we need a framework where we need to get, like what you do, where you get everybody from key sectors and you squish them in a room and you kind of chat about it. And that's starting to drive things and make people aware of each other. I mean, I remember last year at Part of the Pixel watching the moment that the head of gaming at Sony and the head of film at Sony met on that stage. And I was just, my mind was blown. I was just like, are you kidding me?
They'd never met before. Actually, I
said... She was saying that they met on stage.
Yeah.
They met at your event,
and they spoke on the phone, because I told them they were going there, and they thought, oh, we better speak to each other.
Interesting. I'm just wondering that point, maybe just to open up the discussion a bit as well. That's like, does anybody want to comment, or Trevor?
Hey, I'm Trevor Kern. I work with Nikki as a sort of transmedia producer. I guess one of the things that I've seen, and I think it's kind of pertinent to the debate over sort of how it's measured and all that sort of stuff, is you kind of have a mixture of two sets of figures depending on who you're talking to. I mean, if you go to brands and then they then put you in touch with their media buyers, I mean, their automatic question is, well, what's the eyeballs, what's the reach, what's my cost per view, I guess, so that they can work back the numbers in terms of, well, you know, how does this financially compare to a newspaper ad? And then, but in reality, the big thing that's missing from that is levels of engagement. I mean, how can you measure eyeballs when if somebody's spending a half hour on your site, emailing you a dozen times, telling all of their friends, that sort of level of loyalty and engagement is almost like a PR exercise. So you're kind of talking to maybe two different sets of people to get, so you're kind of, in some cases, comparing apples with oranges, because, I mean, you looked at the matrix there of sort of the levels of engagement. You know, if somebody is such a massive fan, they then tell all their friends, they put it up on their Facebook page, and it spreads like wildfire. You know, if that's one person, you know, you're kind of comparing, you know, if you compare that eyeball of that one person and what's the cost per unit there versus the level of actual loyalty, engagement, word of mouth, and they spread it on to all of their mates, then you're not really comparing like with like. I mean, I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's like, if you look at it, really, it's all about audience share. You know, it's about the reach that you have and the quality of the reach. Like, I know that in terms of using a platform like Twitter, there are certain brands that will actually pay out, you know, ridiculous amounts to certain celebrities who happen to have Twitter accounts, you know, like 10,000 per tweet or something like that, you know, and they measure it off of a Twitter follower. But then there's a lot of studies statistics about how effective really tweets are, and the amount of time that it actually, like in that first hour is really when somebody's going to tweet it, and like the realities of what's possible within that platform. So then you really have to look at, it's not necessarily about the size, it's the quality of the people that you're actually reaching. So then it puts together this really kind of thing that I think is interesting in terms of the cross-pollination of audiences by creators, and that part, once it's kind of laid out in terms of open infrastructure in a way that people can mine that data and share it effectively. Because right now it's really hard. If I have a list, I'm not going to necessarily, no offense, Trevor, I'm not going to just give you my list. You know what I mean? I've spent the time, people have opted in a certain way. But there might be people who are really interested in similar things and would try and benefit from what you have and what I have mutually. So I think a lot of the sharing techniques or an audience sharing protocol doesn't exist, like the way that you have it in software. So I think when you look at the measurements and you say the apples to oranges, and you have people that are looking for impressions because they're used to that, and then they're looking on the side of the idea of engagement, it's really kind of like the value is if you look at how blogs came of birth, or even some of the blogging networks, and the way that they just looked and said, okay, we are curators or filters for this particular information, and we are going to be consistent to this. We're going to have this voice. We're going to be consistent over and over and over again, and we're going to build up trust with this party. It's a similar thing that I think creators need to do, because then you can be in a position where you can honestly say, okay, this is the real reach. This is how many people I actually have, and this is how powerful this network is. And it's not even necessarily out to third-party services, because like Facebook or Twitter are, you're held to terms of services with those parties. If there's a breach in your terms of service, if there's a hiccup in the system, all your stuff is gone. Even if so I think mirroring it and then being able to demonstrate that audience share has been very valuable to me, because if I walk in and I say, here's exactly all, here's literally 40,000, 50,000, 100,000 people that I reach on through email blasts or whatever it is, and here's the amount of people that come through, like what I have is the workbook project, these strategic relationships, and then I bundle that all together and I put it in front of somebody, and now it gets towards that ability to do that buy. Because that's how a lot of it is driven right now. It's driven literally off the fact that they want to do the media buys the way that they're used to doing them, so.
Yeah, another thing as well that we've been looking at is a way of presenting your project to brands in a way that solves a problem for them. So if they're weak in a particular area and they're looking to move into it, and to know this kind of information, like I can't tell you how awesome Google is, and like if you're interested in a brand, you can just Google things around them, you can look at them, like there's often quite a lot more information available than you really think online, and that's been great for us. And as well, with taking the stats down, and the thing is that they talk in the way that they talk, and they're going to do that, and you coming in and saying, yeah, but you're asking me the wrong kinds of questions, they do it how they do it, and you can look to slowly lead them into the way that you do it, and I think that's building relationships over time, and I think that's building trust. And that if you get a trust with that brand, but they, when they farm you off to their different departments, you've got to think, what is it about what I'm saying or how I'm approaching them that is getting me sent off to this department, and is this the department I really want to be in? And I think it is a learning process between the creators of the content and the producers and the brands, and everybody's kind of learning how to deal with each other at the moment, and I think the onus is still on the producer, and it's probably going to be for some time, but I think we have to embrace that and go, well, actually, this gives me a certain amount of freedom, because if I know how to present myself, then it gives me a bit more control over the content that I want to get finance for. I don't know if that's...
And the one thing I wanted to add to that is really like the most valuable asset that anybody can have in the room is to actually take the time to really build an audience around the work that you're doing. Because that is something that's going to be incredibly valuable moving forward, and it is a tangible asset, and arguably more valuable, honestly, than the properties and the stories that you're actually making in traditional form right now. So like building that out and taking the time to build it and really cultivate it is incredibly valuable. It's probably the major asset that you could have moving forward.
No, hugely. We look at, when we take a project, we look at three things. First of all, we look at audience, platforms, and then strategic partners. And that's like the three-piece thing, and definitely fostering and growing your audience is our number one main thing.
And future artists do it from a film company perspective, so that we get fans and followers and people that are around the Future Artist Mothership. So whenever we do a project, we don't have to build a new audience. That we plug in and bring in new audience every time we do something different, whether it be a drama or a documentary. Those audiences will stay with future artists and with the ethos and with what we're trying to do. So we actually cultivate, the more projects we do, the more live events we do, the more things, interesting things we say and do, the wider reach things happen.
And
you know,
do all of you have a mailing list on all of your websites for you that are filmmakers? What, just out of interest, what services do you use to run your mailing lists from?
I use a piece of software called Darklight Pro that gives me stats back.
Cool. Because I don't know if any of you guys have heard of something called MailChimp.
Yeah, Chip's the same.
Yeah, and that gives you, that means you can build in HTML. You can also build in a live Twitter feed so that every time they open up your email, your Twitter stuff's there. They've got this thing called Social Pro, so it links into all your Facebook stuff as well. And like for us, that's been brilliant. It just took our kind of like slightly scatty emails to suddenly like looking like pros, where somebody actually turned around to us and said, future artists, you've suddenly gone like really pro with all your mail outs. And like, what's this Twitter feed and stuff? And I'm like, yes, I love open source freeness.
There's another question there behind you, Trev, thanks.
Hi, I'm just interested to know, just in terms of the story, where the stories are coming from, which is the fundamental driver behind everything that you're doing. Like, do you find that the stories that you're getting presented to you are stuff that traditional television and film has rejected in some way by whatever standards they happen to use? Or is there emerging a kind of a commissioning process within your kind of companies where you actually go after people who kind of get the multi-platform approach and who are prepared to work specifically to that model rather than adapting something that was maybe designed for television or film traditionally and is being somehow shoehorned into a multi-platform approach?
I think it's a mixture of the two at the moment, because there's the we get a lot of companies coming to submitting projects who are looking at cross-media in terms of marketing, and they're creating transmedia around traditional formats that are kind of more acceptable to traditional financiers. And then we have a few projects that are total, they're story universes that are going to be designed out. So it's a kind of, I'd say it's a mixture. When on the other side, because I think it's very young. There are very few storytellers who have as you said, the digital literacy in this area. And once they start to investigate, they're really excited about the idea of creating universes of stories as opposed to story contained in a format, because that's what storytellers have done. They've been confined to distribution formats, and what excites a lot of storytellers, and frightens a lot of others, is how incredibly free it can be to create a universe and then be able to design out of it instead of have to always think in terms of formats. So I've had a whole mixed. There was a feature film award-winning director I was working with as a producer, who came to our lab, and she's trained very traditionally, and she's just totally excited about the process, and has now, it was a story we were working on together, and there was another story. She realised it was so intertwined. It's become a huge universe, the whole two stories, and she's designing it out. She's starting with the universe and the Bible, and she's going to go out from there. And it's kind of, then there's but at the same point, she's kind of like toying with, oh my God, is this a TV format? And at the same point, after a month, she goes down the line, oh, I've got a design, and then she comes out of it again. So she's, it's a really complicated process, because, she'll have a meeting with an agent who will say, well, I'm sorry, this has got to be a TV property, and this is the budget. You can either go to the studios, or you can go to European broadcasters, and it's going to be like this. So she goes back and forth between being shoehorned into what she's being told by her agent, and then back to Power to the Pixel, who's sort of going, well, maybe you should. So it's tricky. And when it comes to the other side of the broadcasters, there aren't many people who will finance transmedia projects. So when it comes to Arte, I was saying before, what's interesting about them is the way their commissioning process is working, which I think is the way it's got to happen, is that the commissioners there's Joël René, who's the head of internet, so he's commissioning projects made for web. There's the head of broadcast commissioning, and then there's the head of cinema, Michel Hayak. And both funnily enough, Joel and Michel Hayak are the biggest champions of transmedia and Arte. And now what's happening, all the different departments meet together. I think it's every 2 weeks, and they talk about the stories that they've been sent. So instead of people just having to go to individual silos, they're now discussing stories, and they're actually actively saying, please, submit us transmedia stories. And they're not thinking, oh my God, this is going to be a film. I mean, obviously there are laws in France which make it very difficult sometimes for theatrical things not just to be, I mean in all countries, but in France particularly, because you can't break the windows. You're actually breaking the law if you break the theatrical windows, so there's some issues there. But it's kind of, as a company, they're kind of exemplary in a way. It's because of those commissioning departments are coming together now, whereas that doesn't happen in many other places. Then apart from that, when it comes to financing ideas, there are innovation funds. Obviously, we're going to suffer a big cut in funding across the world in all public bodies. But there's still some, interestingly, things that have not been cut yet in the technology area.
Well, that's still seen as a growth, isn't it, area? That's why. And that's one of the good things about this is you can, as Jenny was saying, you can kind of sort of hide as well in the other direction too, I mean...
And you can always break your project down into kind of pieces and think about the different ways that you can do that. I mean, as well, you're talking about the technology funding. I've been looking at that. Some of that's quite challenging to access, I think, for people who come from maybe a content production background. The kind of the hoops are quite oddly shaped.
Yeah.
They are.
And
but
media have a bunch of different kind of funds, don't they?
Yeah,
that can be,
they have an interactive development fund that Lance that was talking about before that is based around traditional formats, but at the same point is incredibly useful for transmedia projects because it's actually a development fund, which is perfect. It's exactly where it should be in a way. And a lot of producers are complaining about it and saying that they don't understand it. I think it's an incredibly useful fund. And the media programme, they support our lab and our market, and they're incredibly interested in this area. And I know that they're talking about the next programme, the next 3 years, what they're going to do, and cross media is going to play a big part of it, I think. But when it comes to that, interesting enough on technology, I mean, looking in terms of education, universities, there's some amazing collaborations. That's where a lot of the R&D work is coming out. And there's a fund in the UK called the Technology Strategy Board, which is incredibly complex. And at the Film Council, I've been talking to them quite a lot. When I was advisor at the Film Council, and it is quite complicated. But what's interesting that you can apply for R&D, basically development of tools that for the creative industry projects. But a lot of the partners have to be in universities, which is kind of interesting again.
It's like that here as well. There's programs like that too. Yeah. I mean, for example, like say designing a piece of software that could hijack all the telephones on the way to the cinema. I mean, that is probably something you could probably raise money for here. Through one of the university kind of the Enterprise Ireland Incubator. Is that what it's called?
The Innovation Awards.
The Innovation Awards. Yeah.
But going back to the thing, it is there are not many enlightened film commissioners or broadcast. It's same in the UK Film Council. Still, all the funds were siloed. They've only just started. Now they're about to break up, talking about transmedia. The CMC in France, and just as examples, incredible. I was totally gobsmacked 2 years ago when I met Guillaume Blanchot. They set up a multimedia department about 4 years ago, and he's been putting small amounts of money into the development of projects, incredibly important. So all those Arte projects have been partially funded through the Centre National de Cinéma, which is a very traditional cinema funding body. So that's exemplary, I think, as a funding body, for funders to look at here. And in Canada as well, there are several bodies. So,
Yeah, the National Film Board are pretty good, right? Yeah, they've done a bunch of projects. Sorry, there's loads of questions. Okay, where do we start? Go ahead. There's someone there. Oh, there you go. There's a hand there. Really quick.
I'm very interested in the sources of funding and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not a producer myself, and I was just kind of interested in maybe talking about how we feel that storytelling in this way is going to fold back into, because obviously mainstream cinema and television and books and novels and things or whatever, it's gonna persist. and how storytelling in this way is obviously growing and maybe at a cutting edge or something like that. So it's very interesting, and how that's going to fold back in, because I think there's been a feeling over the last number of years where, let's say, the computer games industry is extremely exciting and interesting, but the cinema the industry, the film industry, is kind of taking not replicating that, but they're kind of, the narrative in cinema has become less and less interesting, because it's kind of replicated. It's kind of, there's, if people, so many movies based on computer games, and it just becomes a non-narrative spectacle, and I'm wondering how that maybe there'll be a positive. Do you think there'll be a positive influence in storytelling and mainstream media from this growth in transmedia storytelling? Do you know the nature of how you tell that story of head trauma, for example, is, that isn't in that square box or whatever, that rectangular box, how that affects maybe how people might want to tell more interesting stories, or tell stories in a more interesting way?
Well, I think in some ways, there's a big push right now towards, at least in the country I'm in, spectacle. 3D is this coveted thing, because exhibitors are hoping that they can hold on to it and drive more higher ticket prices and more value for them. But I think in terms of the way that the stories are derived, I think what transmedia does is it will bridge those pre-existing formats more effectively. I think that what you'll see is kind of hopefully more of a return to the value of story within those propositions, because right now with traditional or spectacle-driven work, there's no real, you're seeing it more in terms of the social media in and around that, where people rebel against something that they think is like a watered down or horrible story. So, but I think what'll become really interesting is that balance of when the audience actually has an ability to collaborate within those stories, or starts to respond to those stories in ways that drive audience share away from those traditional forms more. The biggest problem right now with transmedia is it has no unified face. Like cinema, you go into the theater, you know what you're getting. The living room, you know what you're getting. As technology develops, there'll be ways, and we've been working on some stuff that's pretty interesting, where it's more like, it's kind of like almost story detection elements. Like if I start on my mobile phone and I go to my computer, or I go to my living room, it knows where I left off with the story and then connects me to the other people who are engaged in the story at the same time. As that infrastructure starts to build out, that will help to fuel the way in which stories can start to become stronger. And I almost feel like that it's going to help even the traditional forms. I think it's going to hold up a mirror and make them be more real in terms of what they are, because they're going to have to respond to that two-way conversation that I was talking about before. Whereas right now they're kind of just holding on to derivative types of, borrowing from games and not really developing the story aspects, because the game industry feels like they can tell stories and they don't need screenwriters. And then, the film industry has, they're just so derivative and so risk adverse that they'll just, they'll look at what came and then they'll just replicate to ad nauseum, to the point of where people are like, why do I care about this?
And of course, there's a whole generation of people coming up now who are completely the two-way kind of way they consume their culture is totally how they do it, and this is like, whatever teenagers now, they're going to have demand that is become more like that, just by the fact that they won't engage with those kind of more traditional kind of entertainment media, I guess.
Well, I think it's a challenging thing, because it really is that digital literacy aspect. It is really that idea of like, okay, how do I really tell stories in the 21st century? It's like, it's not to say that those other forms are going to go away. It's just to say, like, as these new possibilities emerge, you can't ignore the fact that they're going to greatly impact. You see it in my country. There's like 3 television shows that were picked up that were derived from Twitter interactions. Shit My Dad Says. There are 2 others that are in development, and that, that's actually performed well. It's like the first crossover of some internet-derived thing. So you're seeing it more as like an R&D method that they're using it. They're using it as a discovery method, like Justin Bieber or whatever, like from right off of YouTube. They're using it in very rudimentary ways. But hopefully what it'll do is, God, hope it happens in terms of their storytelling. I know it'll happen in terms of the independent storytelling, but hopefully it'll start to make the work better.
I think as well though, in terms of like the conventional routes, the traditional space, they're starting to kind of experience a drop in ratings and revenues as values shift. And I think with the new kind of way of doing things, that has to have somewhere in it an authentic voice to work. Otherwise, it's just the audience just doesn't respond. I think as those kind of starts to kind of level out and the balance kind of comes back in the sense that you said about the silent era, it is the biggest shock that the film industry has had since the advent of sound. And it's kind of, I think the interesting thing is going to be is that kind of the younger digital native starts to grow up and has those expectations. The interesting will be to see how much the traditional industry is forced to take that on. I mean, if, for example, you go and you meet with an American studio exec at the moment and you say, okay, how many million hits do I need on YouTube before you're interested in talking to me about a film deal? They can't answer that question. They have absolutely no way of doing it. And, maybe in 2 years' time they will, and I think, that will, I'm rambling.
I mean, we always have to remember and bring it back down to how stories have always been told for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. It's very much the situation that we're in now, where we're sat around a campfire at the end of the night, where somebody would get up and tell their story about, that they're in the woods hunting and some tiger attacked them, don't go down there, this happened to me, and a little funny anecdote, little story about it, and then it's remembered and then passed on. But the campfire has just got so much bigger and it operates on so many different platforms everywhere, but you just need to bring it back down, study anthropology, look at how we used to communicate with cave paintings and stuff like that. That was the new media of the day. Go to the cave and look at the buffalo being chased. But it comes back down to that, it comes back down to the story and the campfire and two people communicating, then a group, then a bigger group, and then it goes out wherever it goes. So bring it back down when you're doing your R&D, you can test it out on Twitter, that sort of thing, but gather a group of friends together and tell them a story. If they switch off and start filling with the mobile phones, you probably lost them. Don't develop that project. But if they're engaged with it, if they're asking you questions and want to know more, you think you might have something. And that's something very important. Take it back to basics and then explore the possibilities that you've got.
Behind you there, actually, goes Fiona. Thanks.
Hi. I was wondering, you've all talked a bit about story and how to assess it, but when you're assessing story, what criteria do you use to assess the best distribution channel for that story? And is there still a place for the traditional platforms of, say, TV and theatrical?
We look at audience. Who are your audience? What do they do? The thing is, when you're making content, you are doing the same thing that a guy who is selling apples is doing. You're trying to launch a product into a marketplace. And I think that, especially if you come from a TV background, you're so focused on that one goal, which is there's 5 channels in the UK, I've got 5 commissioning editors in terrestrial, and then I've got X money, and I'm gonna, do you know what I mean? You can write down exactly where the money's gonna come from and who that's gonna be. It's completely different in transmedia, and I think that platforms have politics and have people. So if you break the sort of the distribution universe down and you look at it, cinema is a platform. Cinema plays great to the 15 to 25 demographic. In the mainstream, in the art house, it's just slightly older. You've got gender, so know who your audience is. The first thing that I was going to do if I launched a new brand of apples into the marketplace is I would do my research and I would build my archetype customer. You build your archetype audience person. And because you have Twitter, because you have social media, you're building it from your audience. So you're not imagining your customer base, you know who they are. And so you can then start to look at the kinds of platforms that they engage with, the kinds of platforms that they play on. So, if, for example, you're launching Harry Potter and you do a massive thing on Twitter, well, the Twitter audience is your kind of 35-year-old Guardian readership. That's kind of like your kind of less so now, it's more diverse. So that wouldn't really be a great strategy. So maybe if you're looking at Northern America and UK stuff, you'd focus a bit more on Facebook, and
this is all free stuff that you can be doing now. So you start off with the blog, write your story, your synopsis, post it, tell 10 friends, set up a Facebook group, say come and read my story, leave some comments on it, and then you start that two-way process, that collaborative process with your audience. and they'll start to tell people about this story that's on this blog, and that's how you get to figure out who your audience is, and you then start to profile them. So if you do want to take it traditional, you can actually see the audience member in a three-dimensional way, or have a better picture than you would ever have.
So you take your audience, you look at who they are, you take your platforms, you look at that in terms of your audience, in terms of your story world, and then another key thing is your strategic partners. I mean, we're doing the workshop later, so if anybody wants to come down to our workshop, we're going to workshop people's projects around this kind of a thing, but because some of your strategic partners will come with platforms, or some of your, so with avenues for distribution, some of your platforms will come with avenues for distribution, and sometimes your audience behaviours or and the way they use certain technologies will give you your distribution. And I think it's so important to stop thinking of TV and cinema and digital and just go platforms, people, politics.
I was just going to say, like, a lot of the times for me, it's really kind of predicated very much on the method of the story, like what I'm trying to say with the story, and is there a way that I can creatively say it through a platform or through a device or through a service, and the story will speak, and that's where I'll find it. It's important to know who people are that use those things, but a lot of it is very much driven by the theme that I'm saying, what I'm trying to do as a storyteller, because that's what really makes it resonate. It can be very powerful that way, because a lot of the things tend to lack emotional ties. So like a lot of the times I look at it and say, okay, how can I really drill it down, and what am I trying to say? And then I'll look and say, okay, here's a way that I can try this on this platform maybe, or this service, or this device, and that could really create an emotional connection with the audience. And so a lot of times I'll kind of look at it very much driven that side, because it's like that balance. Like, we're in this amazing time where you can really drill down and see who different people are, and this amazing time where people are open to the communication paths. But like, I think it's like remembering the reason why somebody will engage with it in the first place, and that story, and how do you really tell that story effectively to someone, and then that really starts to answer all the other questions from my perspective.
And then we were talking yesterday a bit about Collapsus and also some of the other projects, and all the different people who you could possibly start talking to and collaborating with when it comes to story, because obviously you were dealing with new technology, devices, user experience, which is really important. And at the moment you start talking to these people in these different areas, experts who have interface design experience, user experience design, which can be all kinds of people. We were thinking, how the hell do you find them? You're going once you start speaking to these different experts, it's going to change the way your story develops probably as well. So in a way, it's really hard if you sit yourself down in a room as a writer and you isolate yourself and you think, oh my God, should I be using this or that? Or if you go right to the back end and you think about your audience, kind of where are you? I think it's quite an isolating experience. So I think this idea of collaboration and trying to, what you said about, how could that, all the places it could be told, then start to try and meet people who understand these places and work on them, because it's going to change everything the minute you start talking to them. So with something like Collapsus, it had 60 people working on it who all did, obviously the interface design and this, the storytelling. It's so dependent when those people come in, isn't it, to the moment when the writing, like you came in very late, so a lot of the interface had been decided. So there are so many movable parts, and I think it's really hard to come up with any.
Yeah, well, I think that's even more reason to drive it from story, because like at the end of the day, like when I step onto set, or I'm working in television, or I'm doing anything, it's all about compromise of vision. You're always fighting that. It's people asking questions and having some degree of answer to give back to somebody. But I think like the more you can drive it from the story, the more you can drive it from that emotional core, that's going to serve you all the way through. It's going to be true. It's going to work when, it doesn't matter if you're working with actors or you're reproducing something in terms of a voice that goes across something like Twitter, it's all going to be authentic. And that's really important, because I think if you don't have that, then you can't communicate what the core of it is to those other people, and you will get lost in terms of when they start to tell you these other things that you need to do with these platforms, or the way you need to interface with whatever it is. If you get lost from what that story is, it becomes very challenging, and it's like you're lost at sea. You know, so you hold, it's like navigating off the North Star or something. You like hold with what you want to tell as that story, so then you can communicate that, because universally it will always come back to that point.
And if, funnily enough, the project that won the Pixel Pitch, even though the transmedia design had not been necessarily worked out, it won because it had the strongest emotional core as a story. Whereas I think a lot of the other projects spent so much time on the design, the devices, breaking down, you know, the checklist, and it was a story that won them the pitch. And the interesting way they knew they wanted to participate with their audience, and that was a really strong part. And in terms of the emotional core of the story, and that's what drove it through for everybody. So, yeah.
I mean, I think the story is definitely key. And
Sorry about it.
I was going to say, I guess I kind of assumed that from a kind of starting off point, in the sense that you need a really great, really strong story that speaks and moves you in some way before you then start taking it forward. It's the same with the traditional project. The rules are the same. And definitely your story will inform audience and platforms.
Yeah, why are you telling this story? Why you've got passions? Why should someone listen to it? And then that's your starting point.
Yeah, but you'd be amazed how many people don't. They skip that part. You know, they don't, you know, as easy it is to say here, and how it's echoed all the time. It's like story is always overlooked or not given enough time, or not. You know, people aren't honest enough with their own process. I had I got to go through the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, which was a really great process, because it was like this whole thing where it was like a pause button, you know, and it was like these really things that you would think are really simple questions, like what is the story you want to tell? But then when you stopped and everything else paused, and it wasn't about all the other stuff in terms of the audience or the technology or all these other things, and it was just focused just on like what you wanted to tell, how challenging that question is, and how you have to really look at yourself and say, okay, yeah, this is really what I want to tell. And then sometimes what you think you want to tell isn't necessarily what you thought it was, you know. So I think it as much as people will assume that it's about story, I think story just has to be hammered, because it's been so neglected for so long.
In a way, it's not that different. I mean, I've just written my first script, the feature co-writer as well, and we've always kind of joked that it was like putting together some sort of crazy jigsaw puzzle, because that's kind of what it's like anyway. I think writing the story, you know, and I think that all the kind of transmedia elements are just kind of like extrapolating that out into other kind of ways of experiencing the story. But
and maybe the fact that we've been defined in formats.
Yeah.
Drives us away from the story, because we're so obsessed with structure as opposed to emotional core.
Yeah.
In all of TV formats, you're always writing to formats.
And I would say start with characters, because there are millions and millions and billions of characters, but there are what is it? 17 stories? What's the
It's like 7 classics.
7 classic stories, but you start with your character, ask why this character exists in your mind and why it's out there. And that's for me, that's my process. I come from an acting background, so we were always taught to start with the character and then flesh the character out. So you either start with the character, and when you start with the character, the backstory, the relationships, all that sort of stuff, then you get this bigger world, and then you begin to explore it and write it, create story bibles and things. So for me, it's character.
It's funny because I'll start sometimes, maybe some project will be a character, some project will be a theme, some project will be some location that I saw, some project will be some image that strikes something. You know, like it'll always come from a different place.
Like when you're working writers as well, like you're doing the writing process, but when a writer brings you a script or an idea, there's always like this whole other universe that has come with it. And like a good writer, like that it's positioned in a universe that makes sense. And so they'll come with an idea or a story or something, and it's just a case of kind of getting them to break down this universe and making it make sense, and then pulling out strands from it.
So it's almost like a new writing process. I mean, like we teach traditional script writing, but we're teaching transmedia Bible creation. Who's doing that? You know, not many courses. You know.
Yeah, and he's really good at education, but so much more so. I'm aware that it's getting close to 2 o'clock and lunchtime, so we're going to be back. I know we'll be back as close to 2:30 as we can, and as close to 2:30 as we can to continue on with the next session, so we can, you know, keep the conversation going basically after that. So just thanks so much.